everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and today I wanted to talk to you about pathological narcissism and the tragedy of perception. Before we get started, there are a few important notes I want to make. Number one, narcissism is a spectrum, and narcissists are people, so not everyone has exactly the same behaviors or experiences. It's about patterns and mindsets. Number two, a personality disorder is a diagnosis. A narcissist is a type of person, one who has rigid and toxic narcissistic traits. Number three, if you recognize some of these things in yourself that we're going to talk about, remember that there's a world of difference between displaying narcissistic behavior and being a narcissist. Number four, this channel has at least one video about each of the topics covered here if you need more information. When the Apostle Paul stated that we as people see through a glass darkly, he was saying that we have an incomplete and egocentric view of reality. He was saying that what we see reflected to us about ourselves and the world through the mirror of our perception is not always accurate. There is no type of person who lends more credibility to this statement than a pathologically narcissistic person. The truth is, we all have our biases, we all have our frames of reference, we all have our experiences, we all have our perception. Narcissistic people are not different in that regard. Where they often differ is in how strongly they hold these biases and how their perceptions are processed. This might not seem like a big deal. After all, everybody sees things a little differently, right? However, we must have a baseline to start from. If four people see a ball and one person sees a tomato, there can be no conversation about the ball or how it got there because not everyone even agrees that there is one. When perceptions cannot be agreed upon, there is dysfunction and disagreement. If perceptions are widely divergent, there's a lot of dysfunction and a lot of disagreement. When perceptions are so totally different that there can be no agreement at all on anything, communication is now no longer possible. There must be a place to start from, an agreed upon idea or focus of the interaction. If this is not present, there can be no healthy or productive interaction at all. Because of the affected perception of pathologically narcissistic people, there can be no agreed upon focus or baseline for communication. In many ways, this affected perception is the wellspring of all the difficulties that are notorious for affecting relationships with this kind of person. It isn't you say tomato, I say tomato. It's you say tomato, I say basketball. The perception of the narcissistic person is so colored by their perceived experiences and emotions that it can come across as paranoid, eccentric, or even delusional. People are at a loss to understand how the narcissistic person has come to the conclusion or the idea that they are now espousing, and when they're asked, it's often very difficult for the narcissistic person to explain their thinking. If they can explain, the leaps in logic are often astounding and senseless, leaving people with the idea that they're dealing with someone who
is profoundly mentally ill, grotesquely immature, woefully mistaken, or perhaps simply lying. Maybe it's one or the other. Maybe it's all of these things. Maybe it's none of these things. The pathologically narcissistic person's relationship with the truth and consequently, or perhaps in tandem, with reality is tentative at best. For the narcissistic person, feelings are facts. They are evidence of reality. If someone says something that hurts them, it becomes a fact and therefore their reality that this person said it to hurt them and for no other reason. The proof of this fact is their feelings. Because they have, quote, proof, no other explanation or reason will be accepted. It's the same way with everything. This is a backward way of processing information where they fit the facts to their feelings rather than fitting their feelings to the facts. It is essentially saying, this is true because I think it is. The proof of its truth is that I think it, and if I think it, it must be true. This irrational circular logic cannot be argued with, mostly because it can't be disproven. How can you argue facts against a feeling? When dealing with narcissistic people, many times the feeling is the argument. It's the theory, the evidence, and the conclusion. Attempts to prove or disprove the facts surrounding their argument are often taken as gaslighting and manipulation. You can't prove that you weren't trying to hurt them or embarrass them or lie to them or cheat them or whatever because they are hurt. They are embarrassed. They feel lied to. They feel cheated, and on and on and on. To them, that's proof of your intention right there. The reasoning seems to be, if you did not intend for me to feel this way, I wouldn't. Whatever feeling has been triggered, anger, shame, jealousy, anything else is now calling the shots. And everything that is perceived now is seen through this defensive, suspicious, hurt, and slanted lens, and it looks bad. Because the feeling is the argument, they may feel that any assertion you make to the contrary is an attempt to talk them out of their feelings, deny the harm you've done, trick them into accepting something hurtful, or that you are dismissing their feelings. This feels like abuse and manipulation. Asserting or arguing the facts of the situation is threatening to narcissists because you're now invalidating their feelings, which is to say, you're invalidating them. Contradicting the actual facts of the situation feels to the narcissist as though you are contradicting, even attacking their feelings. Consequently, you are attacking them. Because narcissistic people are so disconnected from themselves internally, they experience events differently than most other people do. They assume their thoughts and feelings are being caused by other people doing something, rather than being a result of internal conflict or problems. Now, this could be understandable, or it could even be true, but a lot of times it really makes no sense at all. And instead of at least considering that their conclusions could be illogical, they use their feelings as evidence to double down. No matter how gently you attempt to contradict this experience or assert reality, they experience this as you telling them that they're wrong. Worse, you're telling them that their feelings don't matter, and subsequently neither do they. These feelings trigger shame in the pathologically narcissistic person, and they seem to be experienced as abusive, dishonest, or punitive rather than as an honest attempt at communication. This causes them to dig their heels in even deeper, hold on even tighter, and essentially destroys the possibility of actual communication. It has now become about winning. And the stakes are much higher than just a conversation or an argument. Winning is now about validating themselves as a worthy person. This is the bane of their entire existence. Now, obviously, most people understand that feelings can be hurt on accident, or that their perception of a situation may not be the reality of the situation. Narcissistic people do not function this way. Because of their affected perception, they believe that everything which happens is about, to, for, and because of them. Therefore, there's no way they could be hurt on accident because everyone is always considering how things are affecting them. They're the most important person in the situation, so how could this not be true? More importantly, their feelings back up their conclusions. The fact that they are making a backwards assessment of the situation does not occur to them, and it wouldn't matter if it did. Emotional fireworks with narcissistic people almost always begin with whatever they are claiming the other person did to upset them. Anything they did even directly preceding the situation does not matter, is not mentioned, and will not be acknowledged. If they are physically violent and you threw them out, well, the problem is that you threw them out, or you caused the violence somehow. If they have been caught cheating because you saw it in their phone, the problem is that you were snooping through their phone. If they said something horrible to you and you said something back, the focus will be on what you said back. Often things will be presented in such a way as to make it appear that you have done these things for no reason. This is probably a sincere experience for most pathologically narcissistic people. They really don't think they've done anything wrong. They really do think they are a special case, or that they have special reasons, or that they're subject to special treatment. When you can justify anything, absolutely anything, in your mind, the way that narcissists can, you can essentially do whatever you like. They always have a reason or a scapegoat or an excuse. Always. The reason for this is due to a survival mechanism they use called mirroring. One of the biggest problems for these types of personalities is that they require the cooperation of other people to survive, but they've been unable to work out how to successfully achieve this. They require voluntary participation from others in order to function, yet they are unable to successfully maintain even basic relationships with these people they so desperately need. Even the smoothest, most manipulative narcissist on the face of the earth uses up the goodwill of other people eventually. No matter how enamored or spellbound or afraid or dependent somebody is, eventually most people get sick of the way they're being treated. This is disastrous for the narcissist. Many people think that narcissists don't care what other people think of them. This could not be farther from the truth. They, in fact, require other people's input before they can know what to think of themselves. Pathologically narcissistic people cannot create, sustain, or regulate their own self-worth or their own self-image. The inability to do this is devastating to the human personality structure, and it often results in suicidal behavior. Once again, narcissists are no different in this regard. However, To combat this inevitable crash, narcissists survive using a tactic called mirroring. We see this in very, very young children. Small children cannot create or maintain their own self-worth or self-image either. They require caretakers to do this for them through the process of mirroring. This is where the caretaker reflects their feelings and their concept of the child back to them like a mirror. If the caretaker consistently reflects positive feelings and a positive image of the child will create a good self-image and have a healthy sense of self-worth. If the caretaker consistently reflects negative feelings and a negative image, or if the reflection is very inconsistent, the child's self-image and self-worth will suffer greatly. Keep in mind, this doesn't necessarily reflect reality or refer to anything intentional. For example, if mom and dad work all the time, children might get the impression that they're not important, and this creates a problem with self-worth and self-image, even though it's not necessarily reality and is certainly not intentional. This is the same basic way that pathologically narcissistic people operate. They require the input of others in order to function the same way that small children require it. Because narcissists already have such pervasive issues with their self-worth and self-image, they cannot tolerate negative reflections from other people, whether they're real or not. In the idealization or honeymoon stage of a relationship, the narcissist believes the other person is perfect. This is largely because the other person believes they are perfect. Narcissistic people do not forgive, condone, or accept mistakes from anybody, including themselves. To the narcissist's skewed perception, if someone is not perfect, they have no value. This is why they always have a reason or a justification or an excuse or a scapegoat. It's not a real mistake. It's not a real failure. And if it is, it's not their fault. As a way to combat their damaged self-image and non-existent self-worth, the narcissist has created an optimum, if one-dimensional, version of themselves to present to the world that insists on judging them so harshly. It's all good qualities and no bad. They use this flexible false self to mirror back to other people what they seem to want. This is how they have learned to survive, through mirroring and mimicry. They have no true interest in other people as people and are simply trying to get their needs met the only way they know how. As they mirror the other person reflects back to them extremely positive regard that helps create and sustain self-worth. This awesome person thinks I'm awesome. That would make anybody feel good. However, the narcissist is a paranoid and suspicious person in general and especially in any relationship of any kind. Other people have enormous power over narcissists in relationships because the narcissist is dependent on this person or these people for their survival. This causes narcissists to be defensive and suspicious. Not only do they usually believe everyone operates as they do, but as a maladaptive defense mechanism to combat their non-existent self-worth, they also believe they are the focus of everything and everyone is just waiting to take from them somehow. Or they may believe that everyone needs them somehow and they are the only ones who can help or fix things. At the same time, they fear the exposure of, quote, who they really are and the resulting loss of necessary relationships which will culminate in their needs not being met. And, whether conscious or unconscious, they also need someone to blame things on so they can remain perfect and therefore valuable. It's a complicated and unbalanced situation that usually does not last very long. Cracks in the narcissist's facade start to show through, often very early in the relationship. In established relationships, this is often experienced as going back to their old ways. As in, mom promised to butt out of my business and stop being so controlling, but here she is calling my landlord and making everything worse instead of just letting me do it myself. She's back to her old ways again after not even a month. In order to achieve the respect of the narcissist, which is really only admiration and envy, they must perceive you to be better than they are in some way or at something. However, the narcissistic person is so self-loathing that this admiration and envy curdles very quickly. Admiration becomes scorn and contempt. Envy becomes jealousy. The things that made the narcissist believe you were superior and therefore attractive now make them feel inferior and therefore ashamed. Because they perceive their emotions as coming from outside sources, they assert that you are doing things to cause them to feel that way. This is perceived as an attack, and it will be treated as one. The worse the narcissist perceives that you are making them feel, the worse you will be treated. The more you deny these intentions, the less they will believe you. Part of the reason for this ongoing competitive one-upmanship perception is that narcissists often cannot manufacture anything of their own. They can't be right unless someone else is wrong. They can't win unless somebody else loses. Their entire life is a play they are putting on for an audience of one, themselves. Other people are simply props used to make the fiction more believable to themselves. If other people think I'm good, then I'm good. If other people are bad, then I am good by comparison. If others are wrong, then I am right by comparison. If the other person has lost, then I have won. If others are to blame, then I am not. Mirroring is the reason we often find that superficial relationships are more important to the narcissist than relationships with family or people who know them really well. The reflection they perceive from those who know them is not perfect. In fact, a lot of times it's awful. But those who do not know the narcissist have not been tainted with knowledge of the narcissist's abusive, reckless, or uncaring behavior. They are pure in that sense, and the image they mirror back to the narcissist reflects that. This can be why triangulation and compartmentalization happen. The narcissist does not want this, quote, pure supply of positive regard for them to be tainted by those who know them. They will often go to great lengths to keep people in their lives apart for this very reason. If someone's opinion of them changes, or they simply perceive a loss in that pure supply from somebody, they will often go on to reveal their pathological fear of exposure by accusing other people of ruining the relationship or going behind their back to tell the person things about them, even when this is completely illogical or makes no sense at all, such as in a situation where the people involved don't even know each other. This is one of the most destructive things about narcissistic relationships of any kind, and one of the reasons they are doomed to failure. The narcissist must maintain their flawless self-image at all costs. Of course, this is impossible. Nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. But in the narcissist's unrealistic perception, this is not acceptable. Beyond not acceptable, in fact. The waves of shame it causes are intolerable and even life-threatening. But though reality can be interpreted and lied about, it cannot be erased. There are times when someone simply must be to blame for something. There are failures which cannot go unanswered. There are mistakes which cannot go unpunished. In these situations, the narcissist needs a scapegoat. Now their perfect partner is not so perfect anymore. Somebody can't be perfect and reflect perfect positive regard for the narcissist while also being to blame for everything. This is where the relationship falls apart. Usually on both sides, because what the narcissist is expecting from their partner is not possible. Narcissists have enormous difficulty resolving conflicting information about one object. Something is either black or it's white. It's either good or it's bad. It's either perfect and valuable or flawed and therefore worthless. No gray area, no in between. Most of us understand that everyone has positive and negative qualities. We can adjust to this, and we can accept that no one is perfect. Narcissists have immense difficulty with this, not because they believe that less than perfect is worthless. This difficulty is part of the reason they believe that, in fact. You're either one or the other. But because the actual processing of these contradictory things is exceedingly difficult for them. To try and process these things, for example, that a perfect object has made a mistake, causes them extreme distress. They cannot make sense of the situation emotionally, and it results in something called splitting. Splitting is when the mind creates two categories or two images for one thing, instead of being able to reconcile all of the object's characteristics into a total understanding of it. Rather than a complete and balanced picture of something or somebody, there is a, quote, good image of the object and a separate, quote, bad one. This is something that happens in babies and very small children because they don't have the capacity to work this out for themselves in a way that they can understand. For whatever reason, whether it's abuse, neglect, indulgence, or some other combination of factors, the pathological narcissist's development has been arrested and they are unable to do this either. This is why they accuse people of lying to them, misleading them, or betraying them just for not being perfect. Splitting causes serious issues in relationships with narcissistic people and is part and parcel to the idealization-devaluation cycle so many people find themselves stuck in. A person cannot be perfect if they are also to blame for things. Someone who is not perfect has no value. Someone who has no value does not matter. They're not important. And this is how they will be treated. Until they try to leave, of course, and that's when the narcissist suddenly realizes that they're necessary, whether they're valuable or not, and attempts to resecure the situation. We call this attempt to suck people back into the relationship hoovering, and it happens because the narcissist is suddenly faced with the loss of a necessary situation and their self-worth bottoms out. A bad reflection is better than no reflection, and they will do whatever they can to get things back to the way they were. Hoovering is about the narcissist's attempts to control their resources. It's a survival mechanism necessitated by being unable to provide for their needs themselves. it's panic mode. Because people are necessary for the survival of pathologically narcissistic persons, they are essentially resources. Narcissists have severe anxiety in this area because of their deep-seated insecurity regarding their needs being met. They rely on other people to do this for them the way that children do, and controlling people in situations is the way that they try to ensure that these resources are secure and their needs will be met. When they are unable to do this, their anxiety can explode into hysteria, rage, violence, cold silence, or simply fleeing the situation because they can't deal with the overwhelming feelings of insecurity and helplessness that come from not being able to control other people, their resources. All of the manipulation, abuse, and controlling behavior from narcissistic people is an attempt to secure resources from someone who is in survival mode. Survival mode is the narcissistic person's daily experience, even though they may not appear to be in a survival situation. It is likely for this reason that they seem unable to display empathy in situations where they perceive themselves as being threatened or believe they have something to lose. The new theory in the mainstream medical community is that many narcissistic people do indeed have empathy, and listeners of this show know that that has been maintained here on this channel for years. Many narcissistic people obviously have empathy in some situations, and narcissism is a spectrum, so the percentage of the people considered narcissists who may also display genuine empathy varies. The key in most situations seems to be whether they feel that empathy will be detrimental to their survival or not. In a survival situation, empathy may not be able to be a part of the equation because caring too much about the plight of others could result in detrimental consequences for yourself. In a survival situation, trusting others, believing them, or caring about them could result in yourself getting hurt. And if there's one thing the narcissistic person tries to avoid, it's hurt. They are concerned only with now and are unable to see or care that the behavior they're engaging in now could cause them hurt later. Doesn't matter. What matters now is feeling better now. Tomorrow we'll be worried about tomorrow when it gets here. When you're in survival mode, you take it one day at a time. And today they are angry or sad or scared or anxious or lonely or whatever they are, and they must do something about that immediately, as those feelings are dangerous to narcissists. They are threatening. They are intolerable. The overwhelming majority of the behavior of narcissistic people is designed to manage their internal emotional landscape in some way. But the people around them may never realize the enormous amount of emotional difficulty pathologically narcissistic people are having because so many of them are so good at hiding it. They're so good at hiding it and so disconnected from their emotions, in fact, that many narcissists don't realize this either. They simply act, or rather react, to their emotional state, many times without ever even acknowledging the emotional state. To put it simply, fear often cancels out empathy. Self-preservation often cancels out empathy. Survival often cancels out empathy. This facet of the human condition is explored, for example, on post-apocalyptic television shows such as The Walking Dead. The characters are in a survival situation, therefore they are in survival mode, and they must make choices between empathy and self-preservation, between their desire to help, trust, or care versus their need to survive and their fear of the people who might harm them who are in the same situation. They want to trust, but they can't because doing so is dangerous. After too long of being in this situation and its accompanying mindset, most people, even adult people who previously did not possess any significantly toxic narcissistic personality traits, can eventually lose the desire and even the ability to trust or empathize, instead perceiving everything and everyone as either resources to be exploited or threats to be neutralized because survival has reduced everything to this one basic equation. Sound familiar? This is probably why many narcissistic people do seem able to display empathy when confronted with situations they're not personally involved in or in situations where they perceive no threat. They will not lose anything by identifying with the other person or the other people, so to do so is safe. For example, a narcissistic person may be able to feel empathy for people involved in a bus accident that they saw on the news. Or a narcissistic doctor may feel empathy for their patients because the patients are no threat to their authority and are therefore safe. We see this with narcissistic parents as well, when the children are too young to challenge their authority or reject them by becoming individuals. Now, some of this is undoubtedly image maintenance, but some of it does appear to be genuine. It's easy, though, for them to have positive regard for people and for things who do not or cannot challenge, judge, or abandon them. This is underscored by the fact that if they are challenged somehow, or if they do become involved personally, their perception of the person or the situation often changes dramatically. Empathy is no longer safe to offer, and so it isn't. It's canceled out by the fear, rage, shame, defensiveness, and other emotions triggered by their perception of this previously safe person or situation viciously and unfairly turning against them. If you examine your interactions with narcissistic people, and really their interactions with everybody, you will notice this same pattern of behavior repeating itself over and over again. And of course, some of them really don't have empathy at all, and what we generally find them and for others who are in their lives. Everything is colored by their skewed, immature, and emotionally charged perception, and because of that, their relationships are unstable and volatile, including their relationship with themselves. As with any other person on the planet, their relationships with others are reflections of their relationship with themselves. For example, something often overlooked about narcissists is that they don't just engage in splitting with other people. They also split about themselves, and for the same reason. The same good and bad image they hold of others, they have of themselves, hence the false self. The same effort they will expend to hide malicious, abusive behavior or horrific betrayal is often put toward hiding silly, stupid things that nobody would care about, such as making a small mistake. And it's done for the same reason, hence their inability to take accountability for anything, no matter how insignificant it is. The way they treat other people is indicative of their unacknowledged feelings for themselves, which is why they are often so desperate to prove that this is not true. A narcissistic person, the most important thing to remember is that they literally do not see things the way that you do. Their perception is extremely skewed. Their perception is colored by emotions they cannot regulate or understand. Some of them they don't even acknowledge. Dysfunctional coping mechanisms that have become pathological thought processes and knee-jerk reactions, as well as deep-seated beliefs that are often extremely illogical. Perhaps most importantly, many of them do not even know that these things are true. This is why seeking help for this problem is fraught with serious issues if it even happens. Aside from the fact that they trust nobody enough, including themselves, for a narcissist to get help with these things requires them, at minimum, to be able to use insight, which they don't have, to engage in successful reality testing, which they can't do. It requires them to use their fundamentally flawed perception and corrupt thinking processes to examine this fundamentally flawed perception and these corrupt thinking processes so they can identify and correct the flaws in this perception and these thinking processes. For all intents and purposes, this is just not possible. It's using a computer program contaminated by viruses to find the other viruses in the computer. It doesn't work because the program itself is contaminated. This perception evolved during childhood in an effort to keep the narcissist safe and has now become a pathological process that keeps them stuck in the idea that they are not safe, ever. All facets of the pathologically narcissistic person, when examined, come back to this one thing. Any efforts to convince them that this is not true are experienced as manipulation, because why would you want to tell me that I'm safe here with you when clearly I'm not? My feelings prove that I'm not. But they are not safe anywhere, and it's because they cannot even trust themselves, their feelings, or their own perception, much less their ability to fulfill their own needs and care for themselves. Sadly, their dysfunction has evolved in such a way as to, quote, protect them from exactly what they need to understand in order to make things better. It's a tragic situation in so many ways, but you can't fix it. There's nothing to fix. This is what they are. This is what it is. The, quote, bad side of the narcissist is part of that, just like the, quote, good side is. These things cannot be separated. It might seem like two different people or two different personalities, but it's not. Dr. Jekyll is Mr. Hyde. The good news is, for those who recognize this behavior in themselves, there is hope. Whether you are narcissistic or a victim who is displaying narcissistic behavior because you learn to be in defense mode all the time, you can change these things. You can learn to trust yourself, meet your own needs, deal with your emotions in a healthy way, and use reality testing to manage your perceptions and conclusions. It's not easy, but it's possible, and it is so worth it. It's up to you. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions. So please, hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by shamanspiritcenter.com and littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the narcissistic harem. What do Genghis Khan, Montezuma, and King Solomon all have in common? They had extremely large harem. The size of the harem was a reflection of somebody's power and virility. King Solomon was known to have around 700 wives and up to 300 or more mistresses in his harem. Genghis Khan was considered to have more than 2,000 women in his harem. Many of the people in harems were there involuntarily, that is to say, they were slaves. Nowadays, humans are no longer considered property by most people, but that doesn't mean that the harem has lost its place in the world. It just doesn't mean exactly what it used to, although its function is still the same. Pathologically narcissistic people often create harems, and it's for a similar reason. The way the word harem is used in this context applies universally to men and women. Women can have harems, men can be in them. That's really the only thing that has changed. The people in them are still used like objects, and they are still a symbol of power. The word harem usually makes people think of sex or sexual relationships, and while this is often still the case with the narcissistic harem, it isn't the only one. Sex and anything else only matters to narcissists if it's how they receive various forms of validation, or what we often call narcissistic supply. This is the true goal of the narcissistic harem, and because of this, there could be people in the harem that the narcissist has never slept with and never would. For example, a narcissist seeking sympathy rather than sex may still have a harem of people that they farm for sympathy. A narcissist seeking admiration rather than sex may have a harem of people that they farm for admiration. A narcissist needing to be needed or to fix others may have a harem of people that they know fit this bill. Many people who don't believe the narcissist in their lives has a harem might hear this and realize that that's not true. It's just not about sex or romantic relationships, that's all. The behavior and needs of narcissists usually coincide with how they receive and process this thing we call narcissistic supply. That is the supply of admiration, sympathy, attention, sex, whatever it is they need to validate themselves as worthy human beings. A narcissist who needs to be feared might be a bully. A narcissist who needs to be desired might be promiscuous, either physically or emotionally. A narcissist who needs to be pitied might behave like a victim. A narcissist who needs to be needed might behave like a hero or a caretaker. It all depends on what they have learned means power in their lives and how they have learned to get their needs met. For a narcissist, getting their needs met usually translates into feeling better. This is why it doesn't matter if the thing making them feel better is actually detrimental to them or anybody else in the long run. If it makes them feel better now, that's all that matters. Narcissistic people cannot create, regulate, or sustain their own self-worth. Without a constant supply of validation and attention from others, the narcissist's self-worth cannot be regulated and it will drain away. Think about a pitcher with a hole in the bottom. When any human being loses all of their self-worth in this way, a suicidal crash at the bottom is essentially inevitable, and a true narcissist is much closer to the bottom already than a person who has healthy coping mechanisms and who can build their own self-worth. So whereas it might take a healthy person months or even years to reach that dark and terrible place, a narcissist might be able to reach it in a matter of hours. In order to function at all within this horrific handicap, narcissists need a steady supply of the necessary feedback from other people that they then convert into momentary self-worth. Because they can create no self-worth of their own and they can't sustain whatever they receive from others, it doesn't last very long and they are soon teetering on the brink of collapse again. This is a big reason that so many of them seem to overreact to such small things or put such importance on things that don't seem to really matter. It's what's behind their entitled rages and their self-righteous tantrums, the pervasive fear and belief that they don't matter enough to get what they want or that they're too broken and awful to deserve anything. In order to combat that deep-seated belief, they've created the ego story that they are actually extremely important and therefore they deserve whatever they want or whatever they expect. When they don't get it, this narrative is punctured and all those bad feelings they were holding at bay come pouring through. It's overwhelming and it's usually painful, and because they have no self-worth to speak of, they have no way to self-soothe or to protect themselves from that. It's important to note here that suicide among those with narcissistic disorders is disproportionately high when compared with the rest of the population. Some studies put it at 20% when it's combined with depression, something many narcissists have lifelong issues with. Many people believe a narcissist would never kill themselves, but this is just a testament to how good their act really can be. The loss of self-worth and subsequent bottoming out is truly life-threatening to the pathologically narcissistic person because they have nothing at all to combat that with. And they know it even if they don't realize it because they are battling to keep it at bay all the time. This is why harems are necessary. One person is just not enough, especially considering that most narcissistic people use up the goodwill of others so quickly due to their atrocious behavior. And even when they're not overtly abusive, even the most solicitous, people-pleasing narcissist on the planet will eventually burn people out with their endless needs. They can't keep bringing the same old sob stories, heroic feats, and power trips to the same old people all the time anyway, because eventually these people stop reacting the way that the narcissist needs them to in order to feel validated. They get tired of hearing it, they stop finding it shocking or tragic or impressive, or they just stop listening because it's the same thing over and over again. This has not been exhausted yet. But what's the difference between a harem and a support system? Although a narcissist might consider the harem their support system, and in a very literal sense, it is. A support system created by a person who is not a narcissist is comprised of people or their family too, who they trust, respect, and care about. There's healthy and equal give and take with all of the people supporting each other at different times. A narcissistic harem is not based on trust or respect, and there is no healthy give and take or equality because all of the people exist to support only one person, either voluntarily or through emotional extortion, and that person does not ever reciprocate. The people in the harem may also be independent, meaning they don't exist as an interrelated group or even know each other. Traditionally, people in harems were often slaves, and as slaves, they had no rights. They were treated like objects instead of people. The narcissistic harem is no different. These people exist in the narcissist's life solely for what they can give. There's no true interest in them as people or what they need, and not only is there no healthy give and take, there's no true give and take at all, because even when the narcissist appears to be giving, they are taking because of what is called mirroring. Through the process of mirroring, the narcissist presents a, quote, good image of themselves to somebody and receives approval, admiration, sympathy, or whatever from the other person in return. They're not doing it to benefit the other person in any way, no matter how it looks. It is done only so that the other person reflects positive feelings about the narcissist back to them like a mirror, which they then process into temporary self-worth. It's the only way they have to create any because, as we stated earlier, they can't create their own. Through careful examination of the narcissist relationship, this behavior will become very obvious. Love bombing is a perfect example of narcissistic mirroring, and it's one of the reasons love bombing is not proof that narcissists can give in relationships. Love bombing is not giving, ever. It's taking. It's important to understand here, too, that the, quote, positive feedback or supply that the narcissist is seeking from other people doesn't always mean things that feel good to the other person. It means things that feel good to the narcissist, and these might not be the same thing. It can be things like admiration and approval, but it can also be things like pity, fear, anger, or anything else. In this same way, the, quote, good image they are presenting of themselves doesn't necessarily mean what we think of as a good person, although it often is. It just means something that will create the reaction they are looking for from others, and that is usually the opposite of what they believe themselves to be. For example, if they feel they are a weak person, they may create an image of themselves that is intended to inspire fear or awe in others so that they can be validated as strong through other people's reaction to them. If they feel they are a monster or toxic waste or something else bad like that, they may create an image of themselves that's intended to inspire pity or sympathy in other people so they can be validated as a victim through other people's reactions. But it can also be less specific. Anything which validates their existence in any way can be enough. As an example of this, we might think of the pathologically narcissistic people who get supply through arguing, or of internet trolls who are only looking for any attention of any kind. The life of the narcissistic person is a performance of one, for one, by one, and other people are the props narcissists use to make the fiction more believable to themselves. If other people believe it, that makes it more real. And when it's more real, they can believe it and they can convert it into self-worth, at least for a period of time. This is the function of the narcissistic harem. They are kept and farmed like a herd to be milked for whatever it is they can give the narcissist and left out to graze and be ignored when they're not needed. Because pathologically narcissistic people literally require the input and cooperation of others to function, keeping a harem is not just a vanity move or their way of flexing their proverbial muscles. In a very real way, it is resource management or even hoarding that in many ways is no different than stocking your pantry with dry goods. If you understand your pantry to be as bottomless as the narcissist's needs are, then you would understand how much it will take to fill it. Narcissists exist in survival mode all the time. The pathological processes and perceptions that their mind developed in order to keep them safe as children have now trapped them in the idea that they are not safe, ever. Worse, they can't meet their own needs, self-soothe, or create self-worth, and because of that, they are dependent on other people to survive. As they have a deep distrust of all people, including themselves, and because their perceived experiences with just about everybody have been painful and disappointing, they don't feel that they can rely on other people to do for them what they need. This creates a deep-seated, all-pervasive insecurity about their ability to survive, and because of that, they endeavor to manipulate and will be met. The fact that narcissists are dependent on others means that other people are actually resources for narcissists like food and water. Objects, in other words, but necessary ones. When someone is in survival mode, they experience anxiety regarding their resources because they need them in order to live. For example, when there's a snowstorm, people rush out and buy milk and bread and water because they want to make sure they have enough just in case. Their anxiety over the situation requires them to do something about it, and buying these things makes them feel better. Plus, it's just logical to stock up in an emergency. The anxiety over the situation creates action with purpose. In this same way, creating a harem is the narcissist's way of making sure they have enough resources to live on in case anything happens, because when you're in survival mode, everything is an emergency, or it could become one very quickly. This is why we said earlier that though there's a very real difference between the two things as they are commonly understood in this context, a narcissist would probably say that their harem is their support system, and in this way it literally is. It's not just the stocked pantry that's important either. Their power over the stocked pantry matters too. It puts them in control. Power and control are very important to pathologically narcissistic people because they feel powerless inside. How could they not when they can't even meet their own needs? To control resources is to have power, and possibly the only power that matters, because if you control the resources, you have the ultimate power over your own survival. You are helpless no longer. People often experience narcissists' attempts to control them as the narcissist simply wanting to be in charge, but the stakes are much, much higher than that. If survival depends on others, then others must be controlled to ensure that they will do their part. This is one reason that triangulation between resources can happen. It's not just about wanting to get away with lies or continue on with bad behavior. It is much deeper than that. The narcissist wants to be sure to control the situation as much as possible and prevent exposure of things about them that would disrupt the flow of validation they need from these people, that would make the people no longer able to be farmed as resources. For example, if Jimmy knows something about Bobby that Bobby thinks makes him look bad, Bobby will do what he can to keep Jimmy away from his other resources so that Jimmy doesn't come with this bad image of him and cause that flow of validation to dry up or change, and can include keeping people separate or compartmentalizing them away from each other, turning them against each other, playing them off each other, smearing and discrediting Jimmy behind his back in the hope that this causes people to distrust Jimmy totally, and much more. If it's a group of people who are known to each other, Bobby will do what he can to control the information they receive about him. For example, for survival. That's why they take it so seriously. Narcissists don't expend effort on something unless it really matters to them within their very limited scope, and survival definitely does. It is the entire focus of their whole existence. Perhaps the worst part of this is that most of them don't even realize any of these things are true or why they do the things that they do. They're just doing what they have always done in the way that they've always done it. This is how they survive. A crocodile doesn't look like a floating log because it wants to. It looks like a floating log because that's what it does. This doesn't excuse the abusive behavior of pathologically narcissistic people in any way, but it does shed some light on whether or not it can be changed. If their defense mechanisms could be penetrated and they could somehow be made aware that this is what they were doing, they probably still wouldn't be able to understand emotionally that it's wrong. The crocodile doesn't feel bad for tricking the zebras with his appearance. He doesn't feel anything except hungry. This is how he survives. Many people assume that narcissists attempt to control others out of the desire to hurt other people or out of the desire for power. These are actually both the same thing because the desire to hurt others comes from a need to feel powerful. As we've discussed, this is true in a manner of speaking. They do have a need to feel powerful, but a desire for power doesn't just exist for no reason. What creates the desire for power in the first place? A desire so strong that a disproportionate amount of somebody's time and energy would be devoted to creating, imagining, engineering, or securing situations where they can feel like they do have it. Obviously, this comes from feeling they have no power at all. There's no other reason for it. The truth is, despite their efforts, narcissists have no power over other people. They have no power over anything, including themselves, and they lack the necessary tools to take it. The extremes they go to get their needs met and the frantic efforts they make to control and manipulate others demonstrate very clearly how vulnerable and powerless they really do feel. All you have to do is look. I hope that clears a few things up for you, as always. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by Earth Mama's Apothecary and littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about how pathologically narcissistic people are. You are dealing with a narcissistic person. This is very important to understand, so I thought we could address it on the show today. People often ask why so many pathologically narcissistic people don't seem to think of the long-term consequences of their behavior. While this is a multifaceted answer, part of the reason for that is because they are in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you are not thinking of 2 years from now, or 2 months from now, or even 2 days from now. All you're focusing on is right now. And the crisis happening right now, getting your needs met right now. Consequences are secondary in survival mode. We can't worry about consequences right now because all that matters right now is surviving. If at some point in the future we are no longer in survival mode, maybe we can think about the consequences then. The problem is that doesn't happen. There is no future. There's only now and the endless crisis of need. People dealing with pathologically narcissistic loved ones often feel like they're stuck in Groundhog Day, where it's just the same thing over and over and over again. There's always a problem. There's always a crisis. There's always an emergency. Or conversely, there's never a crisis and never an emergency because the narcissistic person doesn't care about anything at all. The narcissist never seems to get tired of this. It's like they don't even realize it, and it's safe to say they probably don't. To them, it seems that every day is a fresh horror, filled with losses and landmines and the desperate search for self-worth and fulfillment. The focus is on just making it through day-to-day life. This is something that many of them have a huge amount of difficulty with, and their coping mechanisms are primitive at best. This is one reason why they are so results or reward driven no matter what the cost. For a narcissistic person, the ends justify the means. They're just trying to survive. They need what they need, and anyone or anything that gets in their way is expendable. If you were starving and you needed to steal food to eat so that you didn't die, you would do that. You wouldn't care that you were breaking the law, and you wouldn't care about the situation of the person you were stealing it from. In survival mode, all that matters is your own life. This is how they see things. Their mindset is such that they have to do these things to survive, and when someone exists in that mentality, nothing is off limits. The problem is, narcissists are in survival mode, but they are not in a survival situation. There's no competition for resources, no need to fear that their survival is in question, yet they conduct themselves as if these things are true. They behave as if there are nonstop imminent threats to their well-being, especially to their emotional well-being. It's not unlike the particular type of food aggression that we see in dogs that have been neglected and starved. This is not the only cause of food aggression in dogs, of course, but it is a legitimate one. If a dog was in an abusive situation long enough, he will have learned that food resources are not stable or reliable. Food might be available now, but it could become scarce at any time, and this puts the dog's survival in jeopardy. Because of this, he will gobble any food he's given or that he finds as fast as possible. And if someone tries to take the food away, the dog will growl and he will bite in order to protect his resource. This dog is in survival mode. He doesn't know when or if his next meal will ever come, so he feels an urgency and an anxiety about food all the time. He has learned that he cannot trust in a reliable source of food, therefore he secures as much as he can, as fast as he can, and if anyone interferes, even people that he loves, they will be dealt with aggressively. Another dog that tries to eat the food or dares to even come near it will be attacked or maybe even killed. This is how the dog attempts to cope with what he has learned about life. Survival mode takes over so that his needs can be met. He's attempting to protect and secure his resources because he doesn't know if he's ever going to have them again. Humans are not all that different from this. We learn things the same way, and we are imprinted by previous experiences the same way, especially early ones. Narcissists don't know when or if their needs will ever be met, and they believe they are helpless to attend to those needs on their own, so they feel a continuous urgency and an anxiety about their needs all the time. Their constant focus is, what about me? For whatever reason, early on, they seem to have learned that they cannot rely on other people to care about them, and they have compensated for this by focusing exclusively on their own needs, to the exclusion and the detriment of everything else, in the panicked belief that not to do so means these needs will never be met. This results in narcissistic people attaching astronomical importance to their own needs and perceiving any deviation from this as an attack and a rejection. Unable to attend to their own needs, they insist that others attach the same importance to their needs that they do. When this doesn't happen, it reinforces the idea that they are in a fight for their survival. No one will care about me if I don't care about myself. No one will care about my needs if I don't make them care. No one will recognize my needs if I don't force them to recognize my needs. Of course, in a healthy relationship of any kind, this is not necessary. However, the pathologically narcissistic person generally does not recognize this. They are locked into a certain way of being, a certain mode of operation. They know no other way to be, and to abandon that would be tantamount to saying their needs don't matter at all. For most narcissists, the only way they see out of survival mode is death. The idea that there is another way to live is totally foreign to them. It's like if someone was trying to tell you to breathe through your ears. It sounds preposterous, and more than that, it sounds impossible. To the pathologically narcissistic person, it also sounds like a trick. You're trying to get them to stop focusing on their needs so that their needs are not met. Now, it seems easy enough to fix this, right? Just show them that they're not in a survival situation and that they're safe. Poof, survival mode disengaged. But it's not that easy. All facts that support positive interactions with people are either twisted, reframed, or ignored by the narcissist's perception and the way that their mind works. All facts that support negative interaction and threats to survival are maximized, misperceived, and exploited. This is what happens when someone is hyper-focused on their own needs and is unable to focus on anything else. Everything is perceived as being about or to or because of themselves. There's also the matter of being unable to attend to their own needs. This is a cause of huge anxiety and alarm in pathologically narcissistic people. Again, we can look to our example of the abused dog. He cannot secure his own source of nourishment. He must wait for someone to give it to him. If he could get out of his cage, perhaps he could find his own food, but this is beyond his ability. He must simply wait, pathetically at the mercy of other people's whims. It is the same for the pathologically narcissistic person. If they could get out of the, quote, cage of their defense mechanisms and circular logic, perhaps they would realize that they can do things like self-soothe and create self-worth on their own for themselves. But for whatever reason, they cannot get out. They feel that they're like that abused dog, waiting for someone to bring whatever scraps they feel like throwing. And more often than not, in the narcissist perception, no one comes. They are resentful of this, and even more resentful of the fact that they're relying on other people in the first place. The very fact that this has to happen underscores and accentuates their perceived weakness. If you are dealing with a pathologically narcissistic person, remember that you are likely dealing with someone who believes they are in a daily struggle for survival, who believes they are in resource competition with any and everybody around them, and who is mightily resentful of this fact. They believe that everything they do is justified because of these things. When you are just trying to survive, how can you be blamed for anything that you have done? How could you do any differently? And for the narcissistic person, everything leads back to survival. Their manipulations, their lies, their rage, their false self, everything. This is why everything is such a big deal. Even stupid things that appear to have no connection to survival at all are very significant to the pathologically narcissistic person. Every time they are told no or denied anything, it reinforces the idea that they are in this alone and must fight tooth and nail for everything they get against a world that is literally trying to kill them. Every time they are asked to consider another person, it reinforces the idea that they're unimportant and worthless. Every time someone will not buy into their projections and their false image, it reinforces the idea that they are too damaged to be loved or to matter. Small things have huge implications in the mind of the pathologically narcissistic person. The fiction that they depend on is so fragile that even the tiniest thing could upset the whole structure and down it goes. This is something that represents literal death in the mind of many pathologically narcissistic people and something they will avoid at all costs. If you are dealing with a narcissistic person, realize that the stakes are very high for them in everything. This is not a game where they can allow any other winner but themselves. If Fox is chasing Rabbit, who's going to run faster? Rabbit, because Fox is only running for his dinner. Rabbit is running for his life. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online and over the phone Monday through Friday, so if you're interested in speaking with me, you can visit littleshaman.org and click the Book an Appointment tab to do that, or you can use the link that's available in the information section of this video. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by shamanspiritcenter.com and shaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about narcissists and empathy. This is always a hot topic, so I thought we could talk about it on the show today. People often ask why the knowledge that they're hurting people is not enough to make narcissists stop their behavior. They point out that narcissists often hide or deny their behavior, so they obviously know it's wrong. But this question assumes that the knowledge they're hurting someone would be enough to stop the behavior because it's coming from someone who already has normally functioning empathy. People with normally functioning empathy are the ones who are asking that question. If someone has normally functioning empathy, that knowledge is all that it would take. The knowledge that they're hurting another person would trigger an emotional reaction that would create a behavioral response. This is hurting someone. I don't want to hurt anyone, so I won't do that. This happens because that person has normally functioning empathy, so the information that they are hurting another person has emotional meaning for them. If someone does not have normal empathy, that information just doesn't mean anything to them. Without empathy to give this information emotional meaning, it does not become understanding. It's just information with no emotional meaning or value. It will not create a reaction that pushes the person to stop their behavior. Just knowing that you're hurting someone else is not enough. You have to actually care about that in order for this information to make you want to stop. Without empathy, you're not going to care, and therefore you will not stop unless you're forced to do so by some external reason. If someone has dysfunctional empathy, their idea of wrong is not the same as how other people see it. For example, abusive behavior, they're not hiding it because hurting other people is wrong. If they thought that, they wouldn't be abusers. They're hiding the behavior because they don't want to be seen and therefore shamed for doing things that other people don't approve of. These are not the same thing. When small children are caught stealing cookies out of the cookie jar, they're not ashamed because stealing cookies is wrong or disobeying is wrong. They're ashamed because they got caught doing a bad thing and now they're in trouble, or people are upset the act itself was wrong. That doesn't even enter into the equation to be considered. It's that they were caught to do. This causes shame, which is the pathologically narcissistic person's mortal enemy. This is made evident by the fact that abusive behavior is not the only thing narcissists hide. They hide, lie about, deny, deflect, or defend anything that they think will bring them shame, even stupid things that nobody cares about. The same reason they hide abusive behavior is the same reason that they will lie and blame you for them getting the wrong kind of butter. They don't want to get caught messing up. And sadly, to them, These things seem to be about the same. Getting the wrong kind of butter or forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning will often receive the same level of vehement denial and deflection that hurting others will also receive. To narcissistic people, it appears to be that these things are all the same level of wrong and all result in the same level of toxic shame. If you listen to this show with any regularity, you know that I don't believe all narcissistic people have no empathy at all. Many do seem to have some level of empathy, and that makes sense because narcissism is a spectrum. But what empathy they do have is maladaptive and dysfunctional. It does not prevent them from hurting other people. It doesn't seem to send up the internal warning flags that the rest of us see when we're going to do something that would hurt another person. This is likely because pathologically narcissistic people are in a constant state of survival mode. Empathy can actually be a detriment in survival mode. If you're in a fight for survival, empathy could result in you not getting what you need and therefore not surviving. If you've been locked in a room with another person for weeks and weeks and suddenly a peanut butter sandwich appears, identifying with that other person and having empathy for their hunger could result in your death. You need to get that sandwich and eat it. They're going to have to worry about themselves. Now, many people might say, well, I would share with the other person. Well, maybe you would and maybe you wouldn't. It's one thing to imagine the situation and another thing to be in it, but either way, you're not a narcissist. It's a mistake to project your experience or your empathy onto another person because not everyone reacts to everything the same way and not everyone has the same level of empathy. They just don't. Narcissistic people are in survival mode. They have always been in survival mode. And when you are in survival mode, you just can't care about how other people feel or what will happen to them as a result of you getting what you need. That's not how you survive. Many narcissists will even talk about this in a roundabout way, describing empathy or caring about others as weak or being soft. Or they might talk about their fear, which is often disguised as disgust or hatred, of appearing weak. Some might even say these things just flat out. That tells you everything you need to know. These are primitive-minded, arrested people stuck in a survival of the fittest mindset where the only way to make it is to get everyone else before they get you. There's no point in telling them that this is not how it is because they see it everywhere they look, and they always have. Everything they see and do and that happens to them seems to reinforce their idea that there's nothing to be gained and everything to be lost by going soft and allowing other people to live too. If there are 10 crackers and Bobby allows Jimmy to have half of them, that's 5 crackers that Bobby doesn't have. What will he do when they're gone? If Bobby identifies with Jimmy, if he has empathy for Jimmy's situation, then Bobby loses something and his survival may now be in jeopardy. This can create a panic, and Bobby may react with anger and violence toward Jimmy for daring to take some of them. Even worse is the situation where Jimmy has 10 crackers and Bobby has none. This is probably why some narcissists can seem to have empathy in situations where they don't stand to losing. If there's no threat, there's nothing to be lost by identifying with another person and whatever empathy they may